Senator Beitman, I recognize that room from the COVID days. And you look much better than you did in those days.
Oh yes, back at the bunker up in Parkman Hills, Wyoming. So
Yeah.
yeah, looking a lot better than I did half dead with COVID. So good to be here.
It's great
And
to
now we're
have you.
live.
All right, everybody, we're live. And so welcome all the participants that are watching with us. And we have on Zoom, we have Senator Rothfuss, Senator Beitman, Representative Harshman, and Representative Burkhart, although Representative Burkhart at the moment is having, he can hear us not so well, and he's not able to provide audio from his end. So we have IT working on that. And this is, of course, the Electricity Subcommittee. Appreciate everybody being here today. My hope was that we could get pretty close to finalizing the RFP and kind of get it out the door. Basically, at our last meeting, we didn't have a quorum. And what we ended up with, though, is we talked a lot about how much effort was going to be required between the economic pieces and the legal pieces. Where we came out, at least the members that were present, was that we had presentations from staff on both legal issues and economic issues. And I will say they were a very high quality in both directions. And it left us with a feeling that the economic analysis required could be done by our in-house staff. They very incredibly, they had 9 people that did a literature survey of 4 hours apiece. They produced a lot of information. They feel like they can bring this home for us, which would free the money mostly on the legal end. We did talk about possibly having an outside advisor as part of the RFP or reviewer to overlook the staff efforts, to get a college professor or someone to do that on the economic side. So the RFP, the thinking at the last meeting, and of course we didn't have a quorum, was that we would shift most of the money effort from the RFP towards the legal questions that are out there. And Ms. Adams gave us a summary of the legal issues. It's clear that staff has closed the gap a lot in the legal capabilities, but I think that's on the right track. So that language is now in the RFP, which you guys have all seen and has been available to the public with that thinking. We also have a list of possible questions, more on I think the economic realm. And I think it's okay if I say those came from Senator or Representative Burkhart. So here we are. And my goal today would be that this is not a very long meeting, and maybe we're getting close to good to go, maybe not. So are there some thoughts from the members? Senator Rothfuss?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So reviewing the materials and reviewing that last discussion, I wasn't able to make the last meeting, but read through some of what you wrote and appreciate what you're saying now. I think it's a very reasonable approach, and focusing on the legal effort through the RFP, and then maybe picking up somebody from the university to work with staff. It sounds like they already did a tremendous job, and most of the heavy lifting. It sounds like a reasonable approach to me. So I support that process.
Thank you very much. I think it's the only way we're going to make our money work in the end. How are we doing with Senator or Representative Burkhart? Do we have any idea?
Mr. Chairman, I can see him busily talking on a cell phone. That's indicative of, I guess we'll call it progress.
Yes.
So
he's on the phone.
Yeah, apparently, well, staff has contacted him, and we hope we can troubleshoot the issue. Any other thoughts from the members online? Katie, what would be our next steps if we were to approve the package as it is now?
Mr. Chairman, the next steps at this point would be to submit the RFP for, I believe, review by the procurement section of A&I, and then we would get that finalized, posted. We would have all the dates filled in, and we would start that process.
Okay. That seems eminently reasonable. Is there any further comment from staff about either the economic piece that we're moving towards or the legal piece?
Mr. Chairman, nothing further from the legal division.
Okay. Dean, Kelly, any thoughts? We on the right track?
Mr. Chairman, just to let you know, Budget Fiscal had been talking to an external contractor about their ability to provide some input to the subcommittee, but those efforts, we just found out this morning, have fallen through, at least on the one that we've contacted so far.
Okay. Well, that's just one, and I appreciate that Budget Fiscal is taking this seriously and going forward.
Mr. Chairman, quick
Yes.
question. This is a question that you probably discussed last time, but briefly, what would the timeline be if we release or if we approve the RFP today? Can you remind those of us that weren't able to listen last time what that timeline would look like?
Well, it all comes down to the general session, I think, next year, of course. And the fact that we can't introduce any legislation, the legislation would have to go through one of our parent committees. And they would have to have the opportunity for a meeting, at least one meeting on that issue. So I think ideally, we'd like to have the work done, let's just say towards the end of September. That's just me talking, and that would allow time to easily go into the committee process. You know, that's not necessarily hard and fast. We've certainly had committees meet later in the year. In the past, it was certainly more common. You could have a December or January meeting even. So if the study is hung up, but I think end of September would be on the ideal front. It's certainly easier because I think the legal questions are eminently doable. I mean, someone's going to pontificate on that. They're going to maybe do in-depth look at other states and things. And then I think that's eminently doable. I think the economic studies, especially if we do something like revise in-house, the E3 model, we're not sure what that'll take. We really don't, but staff has already done tremendous. So possibly the end of September, Senator, for the target to get everything back.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Burkhart, I see you. Any luck? No.
Mr. Chairman, if I can interject here and ask a
Yes, sir.
question.
Yes, Kelly.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 12 of the
Oh, that's
RFP
Katie. I'm sorry.
That's okay. On page 12 of the RFP, if you look at section 2.2, the current due date is November 30th, 2024 for the legal study. So that section states that the initial contract period shall commence when the contract is signed by all parties with a completion date of November 30th, 2024. And then the contract may provide for extension on agreement of all the parties. And so if you wanted to push that back, we could change that date or try to change that date.
I'm not sure that is a bad date to have in the RFP. I think we'll get a chance to talk to the bidder and talk about wanting some analysis earlier. Certainly, Katie, I think in my mind, we kind of want these people in our court when we go to discuss it with in January and at the committee. So their assistance will have to come a little bit later in terms of providing legal advice to the legislature.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does that make sense, members? We okay with that? Why don't we, we're kind of stuck here with Chairman Burkhart being on sidelines, but could we pull up the questions that he had provided to the committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, 1 second.
And Chairman Burkhart, if you, I know you're busy, but he had provided these questions. Why don't we go through them real quick? And he can join and backtrack as necessary when he gets his audio figured out. Everybody have that on their screen? And I'll just go through these questions. I think, some of them don't really have answers. It'll depend how the tax is derived. What would the effects of the tax be on residential and industrial customers? As in under one iteration of the bill that we proposed, the thinking is it would be a wash, that the sales tax would come off and whatever this gross receipts tax or excise tax would go on, so that it wouldn't affect residential or industrial customers. I think that's kind of the gold standard. It could certainly be tilted one way or the other. You could have a net increase in taxation to Wyoming customers or a net decrease. It depends how the numbers dial in. We okay with that? What would the effect of the tax be on the rural electric associations and electrical co-ops? These entities also collect the sales tax, and they would benefit from the sales tax going off. If that's what happens, they would also have to, the tax would be on their members. So they'd be the same, I would imagine, be the same as other electric utilities. What would the effect of the tax be on the generation and transmission companies? This is an interesting question because now we're not necessarily talking about a public utility which provides generation transmission. That effect seems kind of known, but there are definitely new companies in Wyoming that provide generation only, and their sales maybe be out of state. So this tax would be imposed on them and ultimately their customers, whether those customers were in state or out of state. So whether that is a gross receipts tax or an excise tax remains to be seen. I don't think we've really decided how that affects transmission. If there are standalone transmission companies that aren't producing electricity in Wyoming, would they be included? My first brush is they're neutral with respect to it, but we could configure it in we could tax on the privilege of transmission. I'm not really sure how that would play out. It seems a little complicated to me, but certainly generation is what I've envisioned so far. And please, any member interrupt as we're going along. The analysis should address how imported electricity should be handled and how a negative cost of that electricity would be addressed. Example, when an in-Wyoming power company is paid to take from an out-of-state supplier. I think these are excellent points. Certainly the market is characterized by negative electricity prices and so then I suppose whether it's on gross receipts, that would reduce gross receipts, or if it's an excise tax, it wouldn't make any difference. It would be on electricity sold. So if you remember, I think the one bill, the Senate or the bill that Larson carried had the tax apply to electricity that is produced or sold to get at the issue of the importation of electricity. I'm not sure how that was handled with Representative Burkhart's bill. These are just kind of open questions, and our modeling will go after that. The analysis should address power companies' use of EDAM agreements. I think it probably should. We should consider the effect of EDAM agreements. And that acronym is escaping me at the moment. Chris, any chance you have it? I bet you Burkhart does. This came from him. We'll let him catch up with us. But I think these are trading agreements where there's a netting out process. The analysis should address how the tax would be applied to a power company that generates electricity out of state and brings it into Wyoming as a normal operating method. The one bill addressed sales and production. So if that were the basis of the tax, that would be taxed. Address the effect of any levelized field of operation in which there are no other benefits or penalties. All sorts of generation pay uniform tax. I'm not sure what they're getting at there. It sounds like a theoretical deal to try to sort through all these different generation methods and all sources of generation pay uniform tax. I think that's what some of us are thinking, but we had also talked about offering credits for source of generation that pay other taxes, such as severance and ad valorem on the minerals. So it's kind of a theoretical question. We could get rid of severance and get rid of ad valorem and just put it all on electricity, I suppose. But I don't think we'd want to do that. And then do we want to give producers a credit against those other taxes paid? I think that's a fair thing to do, but you guys may think differently. And all these parameters will be dialed in as we go forward, but it will make a very big difference. How should private generation be addressed? This would be direct for one customer. What about this arrangement when the generation is within Wyoming, but the customer is in another state? So let's set aside, we know that net metering isn't covered by this. We're not charging, no one wants to go down that road. But when a industrial consumer owns generation and the generation is for their own use, I would presume that we wouldn't want to tax that generation. That's, but if the generation is sold to another entity, then a tax might be appropriate. It's produced or sold in Wyoming. We could carve out exceptions to the tax when they're under a single corporate affiliation or something like that. But the fact that it is produced or sold in Wyoming would be the basis of the tax. So if it's generated in Wyoming and goes out of state to a different entity, I would presume we'd want to tax that. How do we, if I don't know anything about existing contracts, how contracts have force majeure charges, deals where they can be revisited or not. If other taxes go away and taxes go in, it could have an impact on people. There could be definitely people paying more taxes that may affect what they thought about when they were first coming to do business in Wyoming and, and had their business model. That will be inescapable. So I know we're still waiting for Representative Burkhart, but are there any other thoughts about these questions? A lot of them are open-ended and I don't have answers. Anybody?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it, Mr. Chairman.
You bet.
I think going to the first question, what would the effects of the tax be on residential and industrial customers? I think at the end of the day, that's where I'm at. How does this benefit or hurt Wyoming citizens? What's in the best interest of our taxpayers and our consumers? So I'm very curious to get the answers to that. And then also I want to make sure that the industry people we've heard from have a seat at the table on this economic analysis. I hope that they will be working with our staff on the economic end of this study to make sure that their voice is heard and their concerns are taken into consideration so we can have the complete picture on what exactly it is we're doing. So those are my thoughts.
Good, fair thoughts. Good, fair thoughts. Totally agree. Anybody else? Senator Rothfuss.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, the other thing that I do think our economic analysis should take a look at is the internal crediting system that you mentioned, what that might look like and what the implications of that would be if we're trying to create a revenue neutral structure that's just a forward-looking structure. They would have to model a few different ways potentially if they're incorporating credits already paid, or excuse me, taxes already paid through severance ad valorem or anything else, what that structure would look like. I think back to how the Constitution is structured for an income tax, if one were to happen, where we have a requirement that other taxes are credited against it. If we had a model like that, I think it would be important to explore how that would change the values we would need, and then what the relative implications of that would end up being. So I just want to make sure that as we're contemplating the economic side, that's one of the models we run, not just the standard use case, but also what would the implications of that be.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I think, Mr. Temke, would I be putting you on the spot to talk about how you already have one version of an analysis that incorporates some of these factors, including other taxes paid? Would you be comfortable talking about that now? I know, and how we could continue down that road?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Case, perhaps just to reiterate a little bit from the conversation from last week, from what Mr. Richards mentioned, what we would be able to do for the subcommittee. One was a comparison of tax structures. One was detailed aggregate state electricity production and price data by sector, largely from EIA data, perhaps from APPA data as well. Update the prior Wyoming model, the E3 model, and the 2016 analysis, and then perhaps some sort of external review. You know, through that discussion, I mean, at that point in time, the subcommittee seemed to say, go forth and proceed in that direction. I'm not sure whether what we described last week really involved the creation of another economic model to.
Yeah. Well, hold
try
on one
to-
second, Dean. I'm just looking, you produced a spreadsheet of the impact of a gross receipts tax that had deductibility of other taxes. Do you recall that spreadsheet? You've done a couple of iterations of that.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do recall
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so that would be available, and we could delve into that. I think that's getting at the essence of Senator Rothfuss's question, and you've already done some of that work for different levels of a gross receipts tax, and in fact, you even had reimbursement of the counties in that last version. But I'm right on that, right?
Mr. Chairman, as far as the modeling that I did for the bills from last session, yes, those did include trying to incorporate the tax credits that are being discussed right now, yes.
Okay, that's what I'm clear. We have a little bit of work done on this, is what I'm saying, and it's the right question. It's the constitutional income tax deductibility question that that is one. Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, the additional challenge there, though, is you've got some, I guess you would call it indirect taxation, where, for example, if you're a coal-fired power plant, you purchase the coal, you're not paying the tax on that coal. The tax has been paid on that coal by the prior entity. So it almost looks more like a value-added tax at that point, where you're looking at the stackability of the taxation. And that's not identical to how it would be when you're considering the constitutional provision, but I think that's the discussed intent of not stacking the taxes, is kind of looking at the life cycle of that generation and considering it, which I believe is probably how Mr. Temke did it. But I think there's some nuance to that in what you would select as creditable taxes against the power generation.
And Senator, your point is exactly right on. The bill that Representative Larson carried had that the taxpayer could attribute other severance and ad valorem upstream in the fuel they purchased, that became deductible. That was explicitly in the bill, and I believe that's what Mr. Temke had modeled. You know, it was sophisticated. Maybe it wasn't ultimately sophisticated, but that is definitely the thinking. That's the way the language was written, so that a power plant that buys coal from a producer can deduct the taxes that the producer paid. Right to your point.
And Mr. Chairman, the other point that Mr. Tempe raised, which wasn't in, I don't think, Representative Burkhart's list of questions, but I do think it's important, is the effect on largely cities that would be receiving, excuse me, sales and use tax from power consumed in their community. This would effectively take that away, and particularly those optional cents as well. So some type of reimbursement or something that contemplates the use or power consumption might be a necessary consideration, and something that we would want to see the economics on. How much would a shift or elimination of the sales and use tax impact various communities around the state? I know some of them would probably see a dramatic decrease in revenue, and how would that be compensated? You again think back to the grocery tax as the example of, oh, we'll make you whole, don't worry about it. And it's my understanding that no one has stopped complaining at any point since that conversation was had. So
I remember the original version of that conversation.
Yes, you do.
The nice thing of this, Senator, is that utility sales are the information is it exists, and we can require it to be produced, so that if we indeed want to backfill our local governments with revenue from our electricity tax, it could be done, and we would have known quantities of sales. And I think Mr. Temke did a little work on that, because that was part of again, Representative Larson's bill.
Right.
But Ms. Temke, did you want to comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, the modeling for, I believe it was Representative Larson's bill, it did contemplate, it was actually a tax on gross receipts with credits for severance taxes, ad valorem taxes on the mineral production, sales taxes, and property taxes.
And then there was a reimbursement piece for local governments. Do you remember that?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Case, that I believe that language was within that bill. I do also recall the Department of Revenue expressed a little bit of concern about being able to obtain the data to be able to actually enact that reimbursement or that backfill, if you will. But I would leave that comment on that to them.
Great. I think we'll probably hear from. I think you did attempt to model some of that. The thing is, utility sales are a little different than food sales, because they're mostly single source, and the data exists. It's already they've been collecting it forever now. They report sales by taxing districts, so we ought to be able to require the same thing going forward, so that if we were to backfill to local governments, we could do so. That would be, I think, the gold standard. So that
Agreed. Yeah.
Anything else? Why don't we take public commentary, and then we're still waiting on hopefully to get audio for Representative Burkhart, and then we'll just finish with a motion on the proposal. But let's see if there's any public comment. Kelly, are there any people that wish to comment?
Mr. Chairman, Kara Choquette is in the waiting room.
Let her in.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to comment. I was not aware that that list of questions was posted on the LSO website. I don't think there was a notice that went out about that, but just a few quick points on that is power plants, as Senator Rothfuss said, do not pay the severance tax. The severance tax is paid by the unrelated third party. So I will kind of skip ahead and say I have a couple of suggestions to make to the legal RFP, and that may be a question to add is it legal to give a tax credit to an entity that did not actually pay that tax? I think that would be very difficult implementation and audit as well. But let me step back and say again, for the record, my name is Kara Choquette. I work for Power Company of Wyoming, which is developing the Chokecherry and Sierra Madre wind energy project. It would be the largest power plant in Wyoming by generation and by capacity. And we are a wholesale power provider, or aiming to be. So these issues are extremely critical to us as we seek to be competitive in the wholesale marketplace. I also want to point out, as further background, I think is important to reiterate, since our project development began in Wyoming, the legislature has already more than doubled our project's estimated state and local tax burden, or taxes paid in Wyoming, through two different and very significant tax increases. That was the sales and use tax exemption being removed, as well as the generation tax that exists now. Also worth reminding that there have been, over the past 10 years, multiple stakeholders from all across Wyoming who have told this legislative body as a whole consistently that they don't support adding more taxes on electricity made in Wyoming, don't support making it more complicated, and don't want their electricity to become more expensive. That said, I know this committee is exploring adding taxes on electricity in some way, that you're looking at RFP. I guess I'm getting a little confused now on what's the economic side versus the legal side, but I know there was a comment made at the last meeting that the comment was made, it's not bad to have some outside experts weigh in and be on our side. I guess if be on our side means that this outside expert or experts are making sure that Wyoming doesn't violate the US Constitution or federal law or this unique multi-state protocol that's unique to Rocky Mountain Power. We certainly agree with that. And we also would agree, as I think anyone would, that any credible study, whether it's this economic or legal or however these things are shaking out, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. But anything that's publicly funded should be fair and unbiased and impartial to the outcome. So we have some specific requests to suggest to amend the legal RFP that was posted, I believe Monday, for public review. And I would call your attention to section 5, subsection 1.1, and that's on page 11. We would request that that be amended to assure that the public has full transparency into what the outside expert is being directed to do and what they're told is important. This section currently says, and I'm quoting here from the RFP, the Electricity Tax Subcommittee and the agency, which I assume is the LSO, will work closely with a successful proposer to provide necessary and relevant information to complete the study. And we would request or suggest that an additional sentence be added that would say, all of the information and directives that the subcommittee and the agency provides to the successful proposer will only be provided in writing, and all of this written information will be provided to the public at the same time on the Wyoming legislator's website. The second major kind of category of edits we would suggest is the instruction on the legal analysis. This would be on section 6, subsection 2.1, and this is on page 12. And we believe it would be beneficial to update this to reflect the federal statute that the LSO called to this committee's attention and posted as part of the June 14th meeting materials. So reading from that section, it starts out, the electricity tax legal study is expected to include the following areas of legal analysis. The first bullet, a review of the impacts of the US Constitution, the Interstate Commerce Clause, and we suggest adding and federal statutory and regulatory law on electricity taxation. The next bullet has a question: can Wyoming legally assess a tax on the production of electricity that applies to everyone equally? We would suggest adding equally on its face, and then adding, what if the tax has a disparate impact on electricity transmitted in interstate commerce? And then finally, and I have this, by the way, Mr. Chairman, prepared as an email I can send to Kelly, adding a question: would such a tax violate the federal statute 15 USC section 391, which is called tax on or with respect to generation or transmission of electricity? I guess finally, I just feel like it's important to recognize companies like ours that are trying to do business in Wyoming. We are certainly on the side of Wyoming, and that's why our company has been spending millions of dollars of private capital over 17 years to try to bring more than $6 billion of new and diverse and non-mineral energy investment to Wyoming, which, as I mentioned to the committee last week, this whole electric utility sector, including all aspects, is assessed valuation of over $800 million in the state of Wyoming. Our success of our project would help achieve the objective that this legislature set in 2004. And that was to diversify and expand the Wyoming economy and facilitate the consumption of Wyoming energy. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, is facilitate it, not make it harder or more expensive. Our work to date has already created and sustained hundreds of good development, construction, and indirect jobs in Wyoming. It's led to millions of dollars in property tax and sales tax revenue for Wyoming that we're already paying and want to see that grow, and has certainly led to a huge amount of public support for our project from people across the state. I guess we are doing everything we can to make our project successful in a highly competitive wholesale power world where being cost competitive is essential. And we would really appreciate having the legislature be on our side by giving us certainty and working with us to keep our projects and keep Wyoming competitive in this very important space. As again, I've talked to this committee before, the amount of electricity that Wyoming is exporting to external markets has been declining. It's only started to go back up in the last couple of years, thanks to the new diverse power plant investments that Rocky Mountain Power and Xterra and others have made in Wyoming. And the competition around Wyoming is fierce. There's far more power plants around Wyoming than in it. We have about 45 taxable power plants in Wyoming, according to looking at the EIA analysis. Just 2 of those, coal power plants, would produce about 20 million megawatt hours a year of electricity. So if you think of the whole inside sales of Wyoming, retail sales according to EIA is about 16.5 million megawatt hours. So if the export market and being selected in these export markets isn't valued, you could essentially theoretically say that 43 power plants in Wyoming could go away. All of that internal load could just be satisfied theoretically with 2 coal power plants. So it's really important to see and to get the benefit of the growth of the power plant industry in Wyoming as it relates to that non-mineral property tax base, especially projects like ours that are targeting a totally different market that Wyoming is not serving today, does not compete against Powder River Basin coal, and again, really helps fulfill the mandate that the legislature had set in 2004 to diversify and expand Wyoming's energy use in new markets. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. And again, I'm happy to send these suggested edits to the LSO if you would like.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Ms. Choquette? Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I would request that Ms. Choquette do send that email, because I would make that motion to adopt all of your recommendations later on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please send them. In either case, it'd have been helpful if we would have had them in advance, but I do understand. So I think we're going to have a discussion about legal privilege, and we'll have that with our legislate, but I don't see anybody else. So thank you very much. Is there any other comments? Any other public comment?
Mr. Chairman, we have Cindy Delancey.
Ms. Delancey.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you all today. I will just be brief in my comments. I think Ms. Choquette outlined some very, very good points. I would just like to circle back to the point made by Chairman Beitman as far as ensuring that we have participation from the folks that are essentially going to be impacted by these decisions. I just ask, I'm happy to work with your team, make a couple suggestions, but looking in the RFP and the scope as far as where we could build that in expressly about the desire to have input from industry in the analysis. I didn't see anything particularly that would steer the folks that respond to the RFP in that manner. So I was thinking about drafting some proposed language for the committee's consideration to insert under general
Okay.
requirements.
Hold on a sec, everybody. Representative Burkhart, do I take it that you have audio? I see that
Chairman
you're
Case?
muted. Yes, we can hear you. Chairman Burkhart, Cindy Delancey is testifying right at the moment. So we're glad you're with us and hang tough, okay? Okay. Ms. Delancey, we're back to you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Chairman Burkhart. Really lovely to see you. Just again, just along that lines, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to propose to LSO just some very basic language to either insert on page 12 under the general requirements provision, that 2.1 kind of outlines the approach. Or I was also thinking perhaps it might be better under section 4 on page 17, where it talks about oral presentation / interviews. That might be another appropriate place to insert some language. So again, happy to work with your staff. I'm proposing just again to sort of memorialize what Chairman Beitman indicated earlier to ensure that there's participation beyond just, you know, kind of from the folks that are potentially going to be impacted by some of these questions, to provide expertise from all points of view, and happy to provide that should the committee so desire. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Delancey? Any questions? All right. So with regard to your comments, Ms. Delancey, I think there is usefulness in having our industry and others focus group with our consultants. But as this RFP is kind of evolving down a legal analysis, and really we're getting legal advice in the end, I think we're treading on thin ice to have that be a public process to receive and get that. And we'll have that discussion with staff and things, but there's a way I think that might bridge the two approaches, and one might be to have the folks doing the legal analysis actually have a public meeting to take input from industry about concerns and things like that. That's a possibility. I haven't totally thought that, but in the end, this is they're providing us advice, and that's going to be at some level privileged, and you certainly can understand that. And we have to find the right way to work forward through that. And your points are well taken. I promise in this very meeting, we'll take this up with our staff and think about that a little bit more. But I'm suspecting we probably can't go to the point of making all our conversations with these contract lawyers be public conversations. That's just not going to be possible. So,
Mr. Chairman, may I clarify my request in response to your comments?
yes, please.
Thank you very much. I apologize if there was any confusion. I'm certainly not asking your privilege to be waived through my request. I think, again, to the discussion around this RFP, it's very voluminous. At this point, it feels like there is this legal tract and analysis, and there's also, in looking at the questions submitted that was discussed earlier, somewhat of an economic track. And I think that I'm certainly not trying to insert myself in the advice given to you from your lawyer on the legal issues. Being a lawyer myself, that relationship or privilege is one of the highest relationships that the law recognizes, and I'm very sensitive to that. I just would like to direct my comments more to the economic side of the house, if you will, Mr. Chairman, to be able to afford an opportunity in looking at the questions that were proposed to be included in the scope of the RFP for those issues that are a little bit more economic in nature as opposed to legal in nature, to just build in some language that would give the consultant or your expert who is working on, whether it's your staff or however this plays out in the RFP, just a little bit of steer and direction in capturing the comments in the spirit of Chairman Beitman's comments earlier, just really knowing that In Wyoming, we do our best work by working together and by affording the opportunity for folks that will be potentially impacted by the economics of any changes, just a vehicle to be able to work with the consultants to make sure that there's full information being presented was really my intent. So I apologize, Mr. Chairman, if that was confusing earlier, but thank you for the opportunity to circle back and clarify.
Thank you very much. I suspect as this plays out, I think there's basically some good suggestions here, and that we can certainly be a bit open about our economic analysis, because more so than I think the legal side. But I think we can find a way. Thank you very much, Ms. Delancey. Anything else from Ms. Delancey? Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Burkhart, you're back. Welcome.
Yes, I'm back. I guess you can hear me now.
Very well. And
Okay,
it's a delight. I'm glad we got that figured out. And so we did go through your the proposed list of questions. I'm not sure if you were able to hear that at the time.
No, I was completely off. They had to completely reboot my system.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure how to proceed.
Let me say this, Mr. Chairman, if
You
you
bet.
like questions, fine. If you don't, fine. Whatever you decided to do is okay with me at this point.
Well, how about if we put the questions back up, and we won't go through them in detail again, but we'll maybe call attention to some of the points. Would that be acceptable? Kelly, can we
Fine,
do
that's
that?
fine. Yes.
You bet. Okay. I meant the one-page questions, Kelly, the side thing.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. 1 second.
It's okay. We'll come back to this.
So, Chairman, let me say this as Kelly's doing that. These are just some ideas. I thought that your questions from the last time, your thoughts covered quite a few of the things. I was traveling and put these together.
Yeah.
And just some things I had thought about and have thought about over time, and just thought I would just put those out there for the committee.
We did go through them. Senator Rothfuss, would you kind of summarize how we went through them at a high level? Would you mind doing that?
Yeah, no worries, Mr. Chairman. So we did go through each question. I think from the perspective of the RFP, as we're looking at the legal issues on the RFP, there were a few of these that we touched on legal issues. How would the tax affect or be affected by existing contracts, or the EDAM agreements as examples of those? But most of the rest of them come down to the economic analysis aspect.
Yes.
So separating those two concepts out, I think there are a small number of things here that we might want to incorporate, but they probably would already be incorporated, such as the legality of affecting existing contracts or those EDAM agreements. I think that our discussion agreed that all of these were issues that we needed to contemplate. And to some degree, Mr. Tempty has done some of this work already on the prior legislation. I think that's a fair summary, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I agree. And I think the question of the extensive day ahead market agreements, I'm not sure how things would impact that. It sort of depends if the tax is has different levels because of credits for different types of technology, and that would impact what you're proposing to put in the day ahead market. And I think that would probably impact in a very small way the compensation necessary for that resource. But if on the other hand, it was a gross receipts tax, it may not affect it at all. So it's an excellent question. I just don't have an answer.
That, Mr. Chairman, that's why I asked the question. I don't know
Yes.
the answer either. So I
Um,
guess if we're hiring experts, they can tell us.
But these sound all within the realm of mostly the economic side. The contractual relationship with companies now, and what they have, I imagine they're kind of the contracts between independent power producers and utilities and other customers. I guess that's a really good idea to try to look at what the makeup of those contracts are and whether they have the ability to change amounts based on taxes or not. That would be an interesting idea. It's probably more in the legal realm, although it's if we could actually get a look at those contracts, I don't know if they're publicly available. Some of them would be. But these are excellent questions, Chairman Burkhardt, and we appreciate it. We did go through them. I think in the end, we thought that our RFP stood pretty well.
Okay,
I'm wondering if we want to incorporate some of the suggestions of Ms. Choquette in terms of maybe our legal folks could actually have a point in time where they've looked at it a little bit and they have they have a meeting with an open meeting where stakeholders can come and members of the public and make points about the legal analysis. I'm not sure that that is problematic. I'm going to ask staff to weigh in on maybe that a little bit. With respect to the economic analysis, everyone, I don't see why we couldn't have a couple of open public meetings to discuss some of the preliminary findings and where we're going and where we might be missing the boat. There's no reason to hide any of that or to not be more public about that. Katie, can I come to you about the kind of the sensitive issue about we're soliciting legal advice and the privilege thereof? I realize you're kind of new to our LSO, but you're the only resource I got, and you've already done great work. So can we hear from you about that concept?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So you would have that sort of privilege. So you're hiring an outside legal consultant to assist the legislature in looking at the legality of this. I would note that there will be some transparency built into this. So the scope of the work, if you look on page 12, the scope of the work will include meeting with the subcommittee and agency to identify the questions to be answered and issues that require assistance, responding to subcommittee and agency questions, presentation to legislative committees, and preparation of a final report. And then it does say that the final report will be posted to the Wyoming legislature's website. That's something that's up to the committee whether or not you do want that to be public, but at this stage, it would be a public document. There may be some advice that the legal consultant provides to the legislature that is privileged and confidential and that you wish to keep privileged and confidential. And I think that's entirely within the right of the committee and the members of the legislature to decide how much of that you wish to disclose to the public, just as you do in other committees with legal advice that is provided, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Are there any questions for Ms. Adams? So, Ms. Adams, based on your response, it sounds like some of the things offered by both Ms. Delancey and Ms. Choquette can be incorporated as we go along, as we have the more refinements of the question with the contractor. Would you agree to that? Or I'm really not trying to put you on the spot, but what do you think?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with that. And I think some of those suggestions related to that federal statute, and I think if the committee wanted to, that could easily be incorporated into the list of questions for the consultant that's on page 12. No real heartburn about that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so that's, we could do that easily. All right, with that discussion, I come back to the committee. What are your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss. I think that's you.
Mr. Chairman, I think the discussion about the legal aspects of the RFP. So the RFP we're working on is to provide a legal analysis on questions we offer. To me, that's not a public engagement process. That's hiring an attorney effectively and asking for a detailed analysis from an attorney. I do think that the results of that analysis should be a public document, which is how it's structured right now. So we've hired that analysis, we get that analysis, it becomes public. Other attorneys can disagree, but I don't think you seek feedback in that process. I think you look for the legal analysis. And I think this is consistent with how we've done it in other areas. I think of education as an example of that. Serving on the education committee for many years, we do a lot of consultant hiring for legal analysis there. And it doesn't mean we always get the perfect answer, but we're hiring for that analysis. So I have concerns with making that an open process where we seek input. I think it needs to be publicly available information then when we get that product. So as it's currently drafted, that's what we would get. I do think some of the suggestions that have been provided would go nicely into expand the provision. Ms. Choquette's suggestion, for example, of including regulatory analysis, federal regulatory analysis as an example. That language is good. That just expands. Yeah, of course, we should be considering that in our legal analysis, what regulatory prohibitions are out there. So I think there are some good points. So as we move to the RFP, I do think there might be some good amendments that we've heard raised. On the economic side, as you noted, that I think we should be open to including broad voices there on how what effects it would have, so that we can better understand all of the options that might be available, right? Really get some good feedback there. So I see them as two different processes and want to make sure that we contemplate them that way as we're moving forward. And then the final thought is, obviously all of this goes through the legislative process, which is as open and public and widely engaged as we can make it. So I don't think we clearly won't be taking any action without that public engagement. I just want to make sure that our RFP on legal advice gets us legal advice as we're asking, and we need to be sensitive to that.
Thank you. I think those were good comments. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Representative-
I would agree with Senator Rothfuss. I think we need to remember we're looking at really just an RFP to hire some type of legal consulting service. And while we may want to be a little specific in what we have them look at, it's an overall contract. In fact, I've thought of that my questions that I proposed may be a little further down the road than an RFP for services. It may be in those dealings with whoever would be the contractor providing those services of things we want them to look at. I know we need to give them an idea of where we want them to go. But again, all we're considering here right now is an RFP for services.
Okay.
So those are my thoughts.
Well, I heard one specific recommendation, which was the regulatory analysis, federal regulatory implications, including, it was mentioned a specific law that our staff had provided us information about. Would someone care to make a motion in along those lines, and then we'll see if other motions exist after that.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to proceed so that we would move the adoption of the RFP at this point and then proceed to amend, or how would you like to proceed?
That sounds fine. That's a great way to do it.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would move adoption of the RFP.
Okay. Are there any proposed amendments?
I think you need a second. I'll second it.
Okay.
So we
Thank you
can
very
move
much,
on.
Chairman. Thank you. I appreciate that. We do need a second.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
then, Mr. Chairman, I would move from Ms. Choquette's analysis, which we have in email, It looks like it's section 6, subsection 2.1 on page 12, where the language includes a review of the impacts of U.S. Constitution, the Interstate Commerce Clause, and then insert and federal statutory and regulatory law on electricity taxation. I think instead of the law, federal statute and regulation might make more sense. So it would read U.S. Constitution, the Interstate Commerce Clause, federal statutes, and regulation on electricity taxation, including answering the following questions. And I don't think we need to include specifically that 15 U.S.C. 391, because that would be included and probably obviously included in the motion. So motion is just to make sure that they're including broadly federal statute and regulation related to.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
a question for Senator Rothfuss. Would we want to include an analysis of any prior court decisions on these matters? Or is that already in there?
Senator Rothfuss?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I'd have to go back and look at the RFP if that's already implicated. Do you have a sense of that, or maybe staff would have a sense of? We talk about all the constitutional issues, obviously, within the general requirements. I would assume that that would then mean looking at court cases and interpretation, but I was just looking for explicit language on that.
Well, I don't think there is explicit language, but I think that's what you do when you get a legal analysis. But Katie, do you want to weigh in on that as to whether we need to consider court cases and precedent? I think it's obvious, but tell me.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's implied in all of this. I don't think they'd be able to look at all of this without digging into those court cases and seeing what courts have done with some of these statutes and constitutional provisions in this context.
I agree. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could we get a second to Senator Rothfuss' motion? Got a second by Beitman. Further discussion on Senator Rothfuss' motion? Further
Question.
discussion? All those in favor? How about, I guess we could raise our hands. I can't see everybody, but I've got everybody but Harshman. Harshman, do you wish to weigh in on that? As an affirmative or negative? Or a question mark? All right.
Mr. Chairman, I
There
think
you go.
that's an aye. Thank you.
Okay. We can't see your eye, but we hear your eye. It looks like unanimous. Are there any other proposed amendments to the RFP? Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the first part of Ms. Chiquette's email, she talks about all the information and directives that this subcommittee and the agency provides to the proposer will only be provided in writing, and all the written information will be provided to the public at the same time on the Wyoming legislator's website. I don't have any heartburn with that. I would propose it to the committee. And I would make that motion for discussion purposes and see what the thoughts are on the committee. I don't see any problem with that. It's just our communication to them and our directives to them is not what we're receiving from them as far as legal advice goes. So I don't see any problems with that, but I would just throw it to you guys and see what you think.
Okay, well, let's have without a second, let's have a general discussion of the concept, if that's all right. Have a little leeway. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm concerned about this language because, again, working with other consultants in the past, you call them and just have a conversation. And I think that's a reasonable thing to have with a consultant. You want to be able to, as legislators, we're elected to be able to interact and explore and have these communications. And there's nothing deceptive or disingenuous about that. It's a part of the process to just have that type of open interaction and ask questions. This would preclude that effectively. We would have to submit all questions in writing, and they would have to be posted. That's just a lot of layered on additional work to engage an expert to give us a legal analysis. if we want that opportunity to bounce back and forth. So I understand the desire for transparency. The final report, the recommendations should be open and public, but I think this is excessive, getting to the point where all of our interactions with our consultant are required to be posted. It'll just create an awful lot of unnecessary work and reduce the utility of this individual that we hire. We certainly won't get our money's worth out of it at that point.
Anybody else wish to weigh in? My heart comes down on the legal privilege that we may choose to have an executive session where we talk with these folks and they tell us, they give us advice about how to move forward. That is a possibility, and I would hate to preclude that. None of that communication may be in writing. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying I intend to do that, but I'm saying if we use a public billboard to make all our questions and interaction with our attorneys, it weakens us in some sense. And there are very powerful attorneys on all sides of this issue out in the private sector and in other states, and it's the very big league. And there'll be times when we just have to have frank discussion, I suspect. And anyway, so I look and see if we have a second to the motion. Katie, have I misspoke? You don't have to say anything, but it seems like that this motion would tie our hands with respect to working with our legal counsel.
Mr. Chairman, I tend to agree with that.
Thank you. Looking for a second. I'm not seeing a second. Are there any further motions on any other aspect? Any further motions? Then, at least for now, doesn't mean we can't revisit this if we find something unworkable, but we have an RFP that we're going to propose to go to the next step in the process, which is procurement over at A&I. And maybe we'll get our own staff to look at it too. But for right now, this is we'll put quotations around our final version. And I would ask that we call the roll on this. Is that possible?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on the approval of the RFP as drafted. Senator Beitman,
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss,
Aye.
Representative Burkhart,
Aye.
Representative Harshman,
Aye.
Representative Wiley excused.
Absolutely.
Chairman Case.
Aye.
5 aye, 1 excused.
All right. Is there anything else coming before the committee? I suspect we'll hear back from A&I about any proposed changes, and we'll see if they're very minor and nitpicky. We might just post those changes on the website and poll the committee or whatever. If they're of substance, I would think we'd need to have a meeting and involve the public, of course. So that would be the way to move forward. But we have an RFP, I think. Is
Mr.
there
Chairman,
anything?
may I ask you a
Yes.
question on the economic side?
Yes,
How
sir.
we're going to proceed on that? Is this going to start moving now, or is that going to wait till after the legal analysis has been done and we can kind of weigh that and then do the economic analysis? How is that going to work out?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. I think we're under the gun on the economic side. They'll have to begin. And this gives them a green light to get started. It may mean that because the legal analysis comes in later, and it may mean that some of our analysis might be a dead end. It could be. It's irrelevant when we get the legal. On the other hand, the legal may open up other areas where we need to do analysis. But if we don't start now and don't start trying to find someone to take a fresh look at this from the outside as well, we'll never get this done in time.
So, Mr. Chairman, was there going to be a written directive to LSO on how to do the economic analysis, or are they just gonna take it and run with it based on what we've talked about today?
Well, that's a pretty good question. I think we've scoped out the questions so far, but I suspect we'll have to have an iterative process where we're going to get updates from the LSO and decide if we're going on the right track. All these are pretty big questions. We still haven't answered the basics, like, do we want to backfill sales tax? That's a different analysis. Do we want to deduct other taxes? That's a different analysis. Is it gross receipts or excise tax? So I would expect we will be having public meetings involving industry and this committee at least a couple of more times over the course of the summer as the LSO proceeds. And that may squeeze into September, but that I see no reason why that has to be, that process can't be open and inclusive of the great people that are helping us in industry. Are we okay with that? All right. Anything else coming for the committee? Senator Rothfuss?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks.
All right. Well, stay tuned and thank you. It was a great meeting. I appreciate the good thoughts and thank you for all the public that participated. Thank you to staff. Have a great Friday, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see y'all.
Enjoy your vacation, Senator.
Will do.
I wish.